Today's episode of the Goldcast is sponsored by you. You, the people. You voted. Candlestick will, in just a stroke of brilliance, he put our episode to the vote, to the Bay Area fandom. We ended up almost having a discussion debate about who was the most successful coach in the Bay Area. Was it Bill Walsh with 3 Super Bowl rings? Was it Bruce Bochy with 3 World Series rings? Or was it Steve Kerr with 3 NBA Finals rings? Who was the man? Who was the man? Who was the guy that what could be called the greatest Bay Area sports coach here in San Francisco? And we had to stall it. We stalled it. For those of you who heard the episode was our farewell to Bruce Bochy episode. We stalled it right there, and we said let's save this for another episode. We're gonna unpack that. Candlestick Will went on, and you put your vote to it, and we're gonna discuss your vote and our thoughts and what we think after the intro. But first, Raymond, before we get started, why don't you let them know where can they find us?
You can like us on Facebook.com/thegoldcast, and you can also follow us on Twitter at @the_goldcast, and you can also subscribe to us via iTunes, YouTube, and Stitcher, all under the same moniker of the Goldcast. Like, subscribe, and comment because we enjoy conversing with you.
All right, and Raymond, where can they find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Ray Solis and on Instagram at RaySolis1.
And Candlestick Will, where can they find you?
They can find me on Twitter at Candlestick Will.
And you can find me on Instagram at RudySolis3 and Twitter at RudySolis3RD. All right, here it is. Who is the greatest Bay Area coach of all time? We're going to talk about it. But first, the greatest podcast intro in the game, the Goldcast. Classes in session. Let's go.
San Francisco, are you ready?
This is the Goldcast.
Boom. Welcome to another edition of the Goldcast. We are the voice of the Bay. I'm your host, Rudy Solis III, and with me is my brother, my co-host,
Raymond Solis the first, baby.
And our esteemed co-host,
Candlestick Will.
Yes. All right, guys. Now, Candlestick Will, man, you dropped that bomb on us. You dropped that bomb on us last week and asked the question, who is the greatest Bay Area coach? Coincidentally, our 3 San Francisco Bay Area coaches all have 3 rings. All of them have 3 rings. Why don't you break down for the people, Candlestick Will, the tenure and how long they were a coach here in the Bay Area, and obviously what sport, even though everyone knows. Let's just go through it again because I like to hear it.
Yeah, sure. So let me pull it up here for you. So the 3 guys we're talking about, Bill Walsh with the 49ers, Bruce Bochy with the Giants, and then Steve Kerr right now with the Warriors. Bill Walsh coached for only 10 years, which is somewhat surprising when you think about the impact that he had in San Francisco. But, just 10 years, 1979 to 1988. Bochy started in 2007 and just retired this year. So he was a manager with the Giants for 13 years. And then Steve Kerr, even though he's had so much success, has only been coaching for 5. So this current season coming up is only going to be his 6th year with the Warriors. So even though those are three of the most legendary coaches in all of Bay Area history, none of them have been with their teams for that long. However, when you really think about it, those numbers, 13 years with one team, 10 years with one team, that's actually pretty extraordinary when you really think about it, because the last probably 30 years, most managers don't last that long. Most head coaches don't last that long.
Yes. Now, why don't you let Goldcast Nation know, because Goldcast Nation came out in droves on your Twitter page and really let their voices be heard. What was the final voting from the people?
I don't think it was much of a surprise that Bill Walsh ended up winning the poll. I think if you really look at the heart and minds of Bay Area fans, Bill Walsh is about as legendary as it can come. And even with the recency history of Bruce Bochy and the success of Steve Kerr over the last few years, I think fans, are always going to have a special place in their heart for Walsh. So when we did the poll online, I had it over 7 days from the time of our last podcast to now, and 56% ended up choosing Bill Walsh. 38% had Bruce Bochy, and only 6% had Steve Kerr. So I don't know if those numbers are surprising to you guys. I think that sounds about right for where they currently are, especially with how little time Kerr has been with the Warriors, even with his success, compared to Walsh and Bochy. So those numbers didn't necessarily surprise me, but I did find it interesting that so many did choose Bochy, considering that how infamous and legendary Bill Walsh is.
Ray, what are your thoughts?
That sounds exactly how I position them in my head, because Bochy's amazing, but his overall record is a losing record. Although when he came to us, even his record with us, I believe, is a losing record. But in the 5 year span that he was able to kind of pull it together, we got 88 wins or more in each of those seasons, and we won all 3 of those playoff trips. And he's undefeated with us, which is a big one. Kerr has lost a couple, but I feel like Bill Walsh, to me, Bill Walsh is the cream of the crop for the Bay Area. It's really hard to top Bill Walsh.
So on my end, and then Candlestick, Will, I want you to go last because you are the man that actually posed this question to us, to the group. It doesn't surprise me, but for different reasons. It doesn't surprise me because, as I mentioned in a recent episode, one of the episodes we posted in the last week, we do so many now. It's hard to keep up sometimes. I did say that San Francisco, I think, first and foremost, really, truly is a football town. San Francisco, the 49ers were the first team ever in the state of California, first professional football team ever here, the first team to deliver a championship to San Francisco. Even though the Giants had their parade here, they won their final World Series before moving here in New York. Even though that parade took place here, it was won in New York, and it would be another 50 years before they won. The Warriors, well, the Warriors brought one, but they were Golden State at that point, weren't they? Right, Candlestick? Well, I'm right. Yeah, in 74. They weren't the San Francisco Warriors at that point. So the 49ers really were. And then you have the dynasty, and you have a dynasty that goes 2 coaches, 2 quarterbacks, 0 interceptions in the Super Bowl, almost flawless between Walsh and Seifert. I know that Seifert obviously is a different argument. He is not Walsh, and this is an argument for Walsh, but I'm just talking about the perspective of San Francisco, that this, I think, first and foremost, I would say, is a football town. And then second, it's a baseball town. And then third is a basketball town. But I have a feeling now that the Warriors are here, and if they can continue sustained success with this regime, you're going to see those numbers change greatly. Just seeing the Golden State Warriors preseason and it saying San Francisco on the side, it just warmed my heart. I about lost my mind. My San Francisco brain could barely tolerate just seeing the word San Francisco on the side. It was so exciting. But I just think given the historical impact of the 49ers on this fandom of this city, I think even more so than it's not even just the fact that, Walsh's legacy. It's what that legacy meant to fans of this city. I mean, it was the first real dominant team. The Giants were up and down. The Giants had lost World Series. They had been close. They were close even during the San Francisco 49ers run. But the San Francisco Niners provided a level of dominancy in football that we'd never experienced before, really, in any sport here. And it really, I think, it captured the imagination of the city in a way that holds it to this day, similar to the way the Yankees did for New York, and how that's always going to be a Yankees town first and foremost, above any other sport that it has there. I think the 49ers, it was the first, and so it's a hard crown to, it's a hard throne to shake for the San Francisco Bay Area fans. I am surprised about that Giants one, but I want to hear your thoughts, Candlestick Will, as to why Bill Walsh got that number one, and then I want to hear what your thoughts on why maybe Bruce Bochy got so many votes.
Well, I think you alluded to a lot of it there in just kind of the makeup of the Bay Area and their fandom. Anytime you're first, it's always going to be special. When we talked last week about where we would rank our Bochy championships, I mentioned 2010 being number one because it was, in large part because it was first. So, first professional team, first championship in 81, those things really sit with you. So, Joe Montana is the Bay Area's quarterback. Bill Walsh is the Bay Area's coach. Like, those two are on the Mount Rushmore of most important, Bay Area sports figures because of them being those foundational pieces for the first championship in Bay Area history. So I think just from that standpoint alone, if you're looking at similar numbers from similar people, then you're going to pick someone like Walsh, who was first. I also think some of the comments that people made in their rationale behind why they voted for Bill Walsh over Bochy and Kerr was because of what his impact was on the sport, not just in the Bay Area. The fact that he revolutionized and built on an offense that he was putting together with Paul Brown and ended up, essentially inventing the West Coast offense in the way that it has evolved to become one of the premier offensive playbooks in the game. And that coaching tree of his that basically, almost every single team in the league has had people that were connected to Walsh in some way as part of their offensive coaching staff in some way or another at some point since Walsh started, I think also speaks volumes for his legacy. So I think a lot of people were using some of those points to rationalize picking Walsh over Bochy. I also think that if you look at some of the numbers, I tried looking at numbers that you could compare when you're looking at coaches of different sports, because, to say who had the most wins, well, Bochy had the most wins. He managed more games. And it wasn't just because of 13 years, it's because there's 162 games in a baseball season, right? So when you look at the regular season winning percentage, Bill Walsh had a 609 regular season winning percentage. Bochy, as you pointed out, Ray, has 499 regular season winning percentage because he was just under 500. Steve Kerr, on the other hand, has a 785 regular season winning percentage, which is obscene. But then when you look at the postseason, Walsh is at 714. Bochy catapults up to 679, and Kerr is at 733. So all three of them are just legendary in the playoffs for their sport. All three, as we've talked about, have 3 championships. Bill Walsh was in the playoffs 70% of the time. He went to the playoffs 7 times in 10 years. Bochy was only 30%. It was 4 times in 13 years. And then Kerr is at 100%, being, making the playoffs every year. So, it's a lot easier to make the playoffs in the NBA, but he was also the 1 seed in almost every season. So that's one thing to factor in. With Bochy, he only made it 4 times. Like you said, there were years where he didn't even, go 500, and over the course of 13 years, actually had a losing record in the regular season. Whereas Walsh, 70% of the time he was in the playoffs. So I think, considering how bad his first team was, really he was, 8 of the last 9 years he was in the playoffs. 7 of the last 9 years he was in the playoffs. With teams that, shouldn't have been as good as they were, as fast as they were. So that's a credit to Walsh. So as close as some of those numbers are, I think it's pretty incredible that Walsh had a 60% winning percentage in the regular season, 71% in the postseason. and then went 3-0 when it mattered the most. So, I think his numbers stack up with the other two pretty well, as staggering as the other two's playoff resumes are.
So let me ask you a question. You wrote this on Twitter, and I want you to expand upon it. You said, "My heart says Bochy, but my head says Walsh." Why does your heart say Bochy? Give us the answer now. I mean, I will say this, but before you speak, I think one of the things that makes Bochy's run really special is that he delivered the second dynasty, right? And the first dynasty of the 21st century, and the first dynasty we had since 1995. And I think that is so special. I rank him second merely for that. I just think that run was improbable in a little bit of ways. It's in some ways we had no business being there, but when we got there, Boch made it happen, and that's what makes legends, right? It doesn't really matter what you do any other year. All that matters is when you're in the playoffs, can you make the run and close the deal? And for him to be the second coach to deliver a dynasty, I think is really special. And it holds a really special place in my heart. And I'm a baseball fan forever because of this entire run, dating back to 2008, as I mentioned in that podcast. And 2010 cemented it. And here I am still watching baseball, over 10 years later. My fandom hasn't dulled at all, and it all started in 2008 and then really was cemented with that World Series, and I'm a lifer now. So tell me, for you, why did your heart say Boch? What was it about Bochy's run that you put it ahead of Walsh for you?
Yeah, I mean, as far as like who I'd vote for, I would vote for Walsh on that poll. However, like I was saying in my response, my heart would say Bochy, and I think there's a few factors. One is just my age. As much as I loved Bill Walsh and the 49ers growing up, I was 9 years old when it was 1988. I was 8 years old. So I was 9 years old when he retired. And I think one of the things that happens is, as much as that is, a huge part of your childhood, I also don't necessarily remember all the games the way I do remember all the games of Bochy's era. So, I was at most of those games that Bochy, managed and was great at, or I was at the TV watching every inning. Whereas when I was a kid, I wasn't paying attention weekly the same way. Even though I watched the playoff games, most of my memories of Bill Walsh's 49ers was the 1988 video yearbook on VHS that I watched 3 million times. And, so I associate, some of the best plays from that year with the 1980s, synthesizer music that I can't say it without a lisp, that was playing along with the highlight, So, I have recollections of Bill Walsh's Niners, but because it was in my childhood, it's, I think it's more fleeting and more just spotty. Whereas I really lived that Giants championship. And because I lived and died with all those losing seasons and seeing really good managers like Roger Craig and Dusty Baker and Philippe Alou not quite get there with really talented teams. And then in what is, you can kind of argue, is much less talented teams, Bochy found a way to win with lesser talent. So I think a lot of ways that's kind of the first part of it, is that I just had more life experience in the moment with Bochy's teams than I did with Walsh's, especially from memory, because a lot of, I don't remember anything from 1981 because I was a year old. I remember almost nothing from 1984. I was 4 years old. So that third championship in 1988 was great, but it was the only one I really had any concrete memories of. Whereas Bochy's, I've got all three and was able to experience them in real time and have real memories. I also think, and this is not a knock on Bill Walsh at all, but after drafting so beautifully and so incredibly with guys like Montana and Rice, he built such a juggernaut that when he left, Seifert seamlessly steps in and wins with the guys that he left behind. Could have easily won the two in a row, without the loss to the Giants in 1990. So he had built such an amazing thing that the team had become almost bigger than him in a lot of ways. Whereas I think in a lot of ways, the Giants don't win without Bochy in any of those 3 years. That it's not just that Bumgarner was superhuman, or it's not just that they had some great pitching, but it was all the things that Bochy did in those games, the way he managed. And so again, not discrediting anything that Walsh did, because he also is the reason that foundation was so great. But I think that Bochy has such a connection to those championships, and in a way that it's going to be totally different without him, and it'll be a totally different team without him. And I think any other manager doesn't win with those Giants teams. Whereas once Bill Walsh built that juggernaut, Seifert proved that other coaches could come in and win with that group. And so that's not a knock on Bill Walsh, but I think that's why my heart would go towards Bruce Bochy, and my head would ultimately go to Bill Walsh, because of how much of a juggernaut Bill Walsh built and what he was able to accomplish.
Versus how integral and literally Bochy was the heart and soul of that run. No Bochy, no run.
Well, and no Bill Walsh, no offense like they had, and maybe they don't have Joe Montana because he doesn't draft him; they draft somebody else. So I think you can play a lot of chicken and egg, I guess, with my analogies there at the end. But I also do think that that's why if I had a vote, because I didn't vote in the poll, but if I voted, I would have voted for Walsh. But my heart at this point in life right now today was with Bochy.
I love it. Now, Raymond, let me talk to you. What's your order of the three, Ray?
Mine's exactly how the fans voted for it. Walsh, Bochy, and Kerr. To me, when you first posed the question, the immediate picture in my head that popped in my head was Bill Walsh. I just felt like it was so decisive, like 3 championships. But the 3 championships is one aspect, even though it's the same amount that all of 3 of these guys have won 3 championships. 2 of them are undefeated. But to me, what put Will Walsh ahead of everybody else was just the influence he's had on the NFL that still exists to this day. That's what is crazy about it. I mean, he spawned Mike Holmgren from his original staff that would go on to spawn John Gruden and Andy Reid, who have Andy Reid has yet to win the big chip, but he's always in the race. John Gruden has won the big chip. George Seifert won 2. One from Bill Walsh's team, another he built through Steve Young. From him, that spawned Mike Shanahan, who would go on to win 2 championships of its own. Pete Carroll came out of George Seifert. He would go on to 2 championships, winning 1. Gary Kubiak would win 1 with Denver with Peyton Manning. Jeff Fisher would go to 1, but would ultimately become a pretty shitty coach. Dennis Green, Brian Billick came from that. Tony Dungy came from that. They both won. Mike Tomlin came from Tony Dungy. He won 1. Who else? God, this list is crazy. Sam Weish would go on and lose twice to the Super Bowl against Bill Walsh. Yeah, and under him, Dick LeBeau would go on to have his success as a defensive coordinator. Ray Rhodes would spawn, Sean Payton worked under Ray Rhodes at one point in time. Mike McCarthy worked under Ray Rhodes at one point in time. They would both go on to win championships. I mean, this tree is just ridiculous, and this influence still exists to this day. Mike Shanahan, his offensive influence that was derived from Seifert and Walsh, now we see a revolutionized version of it coming out through Kyle Shanahan, who knew Bill Walsh as a kid and was a ball boy when they were winning Super Bowls. I mean, this influence is just insane. It feels like it's never going to end. The way that the new generations come in. John Gruden is still coaching. Andy Reid is still coaching. Sean Payton is still coaching. I don't know where Mike McCarthy is.
Pete Carroll's
Pete
still
Carroll
coaching.
Is still coaching. Yes.
Kyle Shanahan's just moving into his own.
Gary Kubiak is still in the league. Greg Williams is still in the league. Greg Williams was the famous defensive coordinator for the Bounty Gate scandal with Sean Payton, and then he was an interim head coach for the Cleveland Browns last year, and then now he's I don't know where he is now, but yeah, a lot of these guys are still coaching. It's crazy. So, and some of them are just analysts now. But yeah, to me, that's where Bill Walsh just has this insane influence, and the fact that it still exists, like to me, like that's what kind of put him over the edge. Like if we went pure wins and stuff like that, I think I'd have to go with like Steve. Like if I was to go statistically, I would say Steve Kerr, because the amount of wins in the window that he has done it in is beyond anything these other two coaches have done. But at the same time, especially the dominance in the regular season, it's just insane what he's done in the regular season. But when I go beyond just the championship wins, like Bill Walsh has this legacy that is still felt by the league today and still referenced by the league today. And that to me carried more weight in the ultimate decision on who was the greatest Bay Area coach.
Can I ask you a question, Ray? So, we're all the same age, and you also, all of us were mere kids, like really young during the 49ers regime. Now, so how did that influence? Have you gone back and seen? I mean, obviously we've done our gold dives that we do off season. They'll be back when we get back to the off season, but we've done gold dives into a lot of those games. But did you on your own? Because I went and I own the Super Bowls on DVD. I've seen every Super Bowl the Niners have won at least 5 times, and I've gone and I think I've seen almost every NFC championship that the 49ers have won. I think I've seen them all. I haven't seen quite every game they've won in the playoffs under the Montana regime, but I'm about halfway there. What about you? Have you gone back and seen a lot of those games? What about your personal journey through that? Because obviously I think Candlestick Will brings up a great point. We were kids.
Yeah, to be honest, I remember Steve Young's era more than Joe Montana's. And so I just feel like, that one to me has more resonation. I watched Bruce Bochy's, I watched Steve Kerr's, both of their runs way more closely. So, I mean, that to me wasn't a deciding factor. I remember it. I remember those, I obviously remember the Warriors and the Giants way more than Bill Walsh's. Bill Walsh's I remember like the last like 2. And the other ones I watched like in retrospect, like old broadcasts from before. So to me, like that's like how I view it. But yeah, I mean that's to me it wasn't as big of a factor.
For me, I really have gone back and really done as Ray, on the gold dives and Candlestick. Well, you'll see. I can't wait for us to do gold dives after this season and really dig into Giants games, Warriors games, and more 49ers games. I can't wait to just unpack these games. But I really, during the Harbaugh run, especially, I became really obsessed with just where this team came from. And I didn't just want to say Joe Montana, Joe Montana's the greatest. I really wanted to know why. And I went and watched a lot of different games. I've read countless Wikipedia pages on different seasons. I wanted to know what happened after the first Super Bowl win. Why'd they go 2-12? The years of trying to get past New York and Chicago. What happened after the 84 one? Why did we only go back to back once? What happened in these intervening years? And where was Joe? And where was he? Where was Bill? Like what exactly happened between these 4 Super Bowl wins, and in particular the 3 with Walsh? Where were the 49ers and what was going on in these intervening years? And so I definitely feel a much deeper connection to that era. And I'm actually the opposite, Ray. I feel a much deeper connection to the Joe Montana era than the Steve Young era, because I lived it all. I remember the big Dallas Cowboys 49ers, the rivalry. Obviously that's the greatest, in my opinion, the greatest postseason rivalry in NFL history. It spans over 30 years, from the 70s through the 80s through the 90s, and both teams getting some pretty intense licks in. But I consider myself, I actually have a much deeper connection to the Bill Walsh era than almost any previous era for any sports team, because I just spent so much time and going back and reviewing clips. I was actually joking, Candlestick Will, I was looking at a highlight reel of the 49ers and the Browns after this Monday, after we thrashed them on Monday. So the next day I'm on YouTube and I'm watching the highlight reel, and then afterwards YouTube suggests a random game on Monday night in 1987, the year before we played them in the Super Bowl. And I was like, ooh, I got to watch this. So then I spent the next 20 minutes watching that highlight reel and was equally as thoroughly entertained just seeing Joe and then going against the Browns, and it's Marty Schottenheimer is the coach. And then I went and did a whole deep dive on that year and on Marty Schottenheimer's career with the Cleveland Browns, because I had forgotten that he was the coach before, and he'd been fired the year before they went to the Super Bowl, and just did this whole deep dive on the 49ers and that year. What happened, what was their record, what were the games, because even though I've read this stuff over and over, I just love to re-educate myself. So for me, I'm actually the opposite of both of you. I actually have the deepest connection to the Bill Walsh era, because I've just done so much history, and I'm just fascinated with that decade. If I could go back, and I definitely want to get to a point one day where I can say I've seen every playoff game that Joe Montana's ever played. I definitely want to watch every winning season, every game we've ever played to win the Super Bowl, every playoff game. That's my first bucket list goal. I want to see every playoff run Joe made to a Super Bowl win. And I'm about halfway there. But that's definitely one of my big goals. But that is definitely, for me, the one I have the most personal connection with. So I just think it's really interesting that the three of us kind of all come at this from different perspectives. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things when I originally posted the idea last week on the podcast, my initial question was actually, if Steve Kerr wins a fourth, where does that put him, and does it jump him over these guys? And, I don't know if that would happen. I think the fact that Steve Kerr got 6% of the vote in the poll that we did, suggests that he's, in the eyes of fans, he's nowhere near Walsh and Bochy yet. But if he gets a fourth championship, especially with Durant gone now, and this team being looked at as, dynasty's over, it's done, that if he wins again, it doesn't have to be this year, but if he just wins a fourth time, that I think that puts him in a really unique position as far as the success that he'll have had as a coach in his league. But if you just look, I mean, I was doing this during the NBA season last year, where I was looking at Steve Kerr's record over his career. I mean, it's really stupid how unbelievable his record is. So his very first year, if you combine regular season and playoffs, he was 83-20. And then the following year, when they won 73, he went 88-18, which is just unheard of. Never happened before. Then he goes 83-16 the following year. So the first 3 years of his career, he wins over 80 games. And there's 82 games in the regular season. So to win over 80 games, or win over 82 games, in the regular season and playoffs combined, is just unbelievable. And then he really fell off these last 2 years, winning 74 and 71. So he went 74 and 29 2 years ago, and he went 71 and 33 last year. So I mean, his winning percentage is over the time that he's been there is just insane. It's just unbelievable. And to put it in perspective, I think I have these numbers right. I'll double check, but I'm pretty sure the totals are that he's won 399 games in those 5 years, which is the most by any coach in the history of the NBA over a 5-year span. And so I think I have this right, that he's 399 and 116. To put that in perspective, Don Nelson, who's considered a great coach and a Hall of Fame coach for the Warriors, his entire tenure with the Warriors, he went 422 and 443. So he only won 23 more games than Kerr has.
Wow.
And Don Nelson did that over 865 games. And
wow.
Kerr hasn't even coached 600 games yet.
Well, and I'll say this, I like this question that you're posing, and you're right, you did pose it this way. And so we're going to frame it like this, and then we're going to wrap up. Kerr has to win one in the city of San Francisco. And that's the only way, and it may not be fair, it may not be right, but this is I'm a San Francisco Bay Area native, 23rd and Mission, St. Luke's Hospital, that's where I'm from. the only way for Kerr to truly be fully embraced by the San Francisco fandom, he has to win one in the city. He has to bring a championship to the city, because as much as San Francisco embraced, and I was there. I was there after oh man. I was there after the first time we beat LeBron. The second time we beat LeBron. I lose track of how many times we beat LeBron. Yeah, we did. I won the second championship. The second one? It was the second championship we won. That one, I was there, and San Francisco was going bananas. Okay, so the city was going crazy. They lit a car on fire, the whole nine, the usual insanity that cities do when they win championships. But that's just how San Francisco is, man. It's like LA or New York. You know, they're not going to fully embrace him until he brings a championship to the city of San Francisco.
Yeah, I mean, I think that'll make the case for him as far as getting, if he gets a fourth championship and a first one in San Francisco, and it'll be the first one ever in the city of San Francisco for the Warriors, that I think that would then, kind of be that perfect storm for him to be in the conversation right with Bochy and Walsh, and maybe the vote ends up being, a three-way tie. I don't know if 4 championships would be enough for Kerr to, springboard over Bochy and Walsh, just because of how revered Walsh is and how revered Bochy's going to be, because he's literally the greatest manager in San Francisco Giants history. And Bill Walsh is the greatest coach in San Francisco 49er history. So, Steve Kerr, no matter how many championships he wins from this point on, might never jump those two in the eyes of some. But I think if he wins another one, he absolutely deserves to be in the conversation, especially because of the new narrative that is now in the Warriors, talking points this whole last offseason, which is, with Durant gone, their window is over, or their window is closed. And, Steph Curry, I don't know if this is breaking news or not on this podcast, but he just dropped 40 points on the Timberwolves in the preseason in 25 minutes. So Steph Curry is going to have an MVP type season, and they very well might have a pretty decent playoff seed even without Clay. Come playoff time. And if they get a healthy Clay in the playoffs, they might be able to make quite a nice run. It doesn't guarantee they'll win a championship, and there's certainly some very good NBA teams right now across the league. So there's no guarantee they'd be able to even make it back to the finals, even if Clay's healthy. But I also think that if Kerr ends up getting them back there and they get to a 6th finals and find a way to win it, then you have to put him in the conversation. I don't think there's any argument there that he deserves to be in the conversation at that point.
Yeah, I agree on that one.
Agreed too. Raymond, any final thoughts?
The Bay Area is a pretty spoiled sports town.
We're just sitting here comparing dynasty after dynasty. What a tough life. What a tough life for a San Francisco Bay Area sports fan. Hey, which dynasty's the best, guys? That's a great point, Ray. Candlestick Will, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to pour a little out for any Dodger fans out there that had to watch Kershaw last night.
Oh
man, the best closer on the Giants team.
Man, I couldn't believe it. Back to back. I'm sorry. Honestly, I'm just going to say this now. They should cut him after that. I know he's big on that payroll, but after that performance, and I don't think that's a hot take. It's just like, you are supposed to be the greatest regular season pitcher of all time. We have believed in you. We have given you chance after chance after chance to prove yourself in the postseason as the ace that you are all year. and you literally single-handedly destroy any opportunity for these guys to go on a run. The team was just, they were just wiped after that. He literally pulled the soul out of that team, and Kershaw should be cut. I swear to God, that if Bill Walsh was the coach, he would cut him after that.
He cut Roger Craig because he fumbled in the playoffs.
Sure did.
Yeah, Bill Walsh. I mean, going back to where we were as humans at the time, Walsh was a 49ers coach. As a 9-year-old, I was not a very big fan of Bill Walsh's roster decisions, whether it was getting rid of Ronnie Lott and Roger Craig with the Plan B free agency, or the fact that he set the foundation to send guys like Montana out, because his philosophy was it's better to get rid of a guy a year early than a year too late. Which is
GM Bill Walsh wasn't as successful as head coach Bill Walsh.
Well, and
although he still had a great eye for talent.
Well, yeah, and I'm not even necessarily knocking his decision making as much as the damage it did to a 9-year-old, diehard fan.
Yeah, he was so cutthroat, very Belichickian.
Because and I think that being cutthroat is part of the business, and it's if you can't produce the way you could, the whole point of me drafting this other guy or trading for this other guy is because I need someone to replace you when you're no longer at your best. And you have a Hall of Fame backup quarterback, which no one has ever had in the history of mankind. Unless you want to say Aaron Rodgers when he was with Brett Favre in Green Bay, but it's like, most of the time that's always going to be an ugly transition. And, Bill Walsh had no problem making the ugly transitions and getting rid of the older guys for the younger guys, because like you said, he had a great eye for talent. So his backups were ready to take on the role of starters and replace the guys that we had fallen in love with. Yeah,
no doubt. I think every kid was so scarred when Joe was traded to the Chiefs. That was a brutal day. It's like it's just one of those days where, like, where were you on the day that you heard this? Like, I don't quite remember it, but man, I remember the emotion. The feeling like it was yesterday. Excellent, guys. That was great. We're definitely going to have to pose another one of those questions, and then Candlestick will put it to a vote. But what is your vote? Let us know on YouTube.com. We heard so many people on Twitter. We definitely want to hear your comments on this episode. What do you think? Can Kerr leapfrog them? Does he have to truly win a championship in San Francisco to even be on this level? Is Bill Walsh still the greatest? What are your thoughts on Boch? Let us know in the YouTube comments at youtube.com/thegoldcast. All right, so concludes another edition of the Goldcast. We are the voice of the Bay. I'm your host, Rudy Solis III, and with me is my brother, my co-host,
Raymond Solis I, baby.
And our esteemed co-host,
Candlestick Will.
Yes, boom. We'll see you next time. Same Goldcast time, same Goldcast channel. Dodgers suck.
This is the Goldcast.